Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. I will be your moderator tonight. My name is Evanique, and tonight we have Brian Nelson, and he is going to discuss the final chapter of well, not the final chapter, but the final session of Divine Feminine, which is going to be Joseph Campbell. We may do more with Joseph Campbell in the future. We need to talk about that. But right now, Brian's going to talk about that in relation to Divine Feminine. So I am going to turn it over to him. I'm going to ask that everybody go on mute, just so that the quality is clear for the recording. And with that, Brian, whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank Evanique for inspiring and supporting and making many of her own presentations to this series. I couldn't get through any of it without her help, including this evening. We'll see how it goes. And my wife's Penny is in the other room. Can you wave, Penny? Oh, she can wave. And so thank you. I've really enjoyed doing this whole series. For me, it's meant a lot, and I think for Penny too. We read the book Goddess Power from Isabella Price, who is really I've developed a lot of respect for her in going through this book, not just once or twice, but several times in making the presentation. Each time I read one of her chapters, I got more and more out of it and realized how much she had put into it. So last week we gave her the last word. We played an interview video from her, or an interview of her on video format. And she had a chance to make some of her final points as regards this book. Of course, it wasn't an interview for us. It was an interview she'd done with someone else, but it talked about the book and what she thought were the best or most important takeaways. And I thought it was appropriate to give her the last word. A couple of the takeaways are that we all have maybe in a different order. Number one is that we should try to, in thinking of the divine masculine and feminine, try to move away from genders like male and female. It's really just it's a category of characteristics or qualities that in today's day and age happen to be somewhat overlooked, and there are probably reasons for that, but to reintegrate those qualities like patience and love, cooperation, respect for nature. I have a list of them coming up later. She suggested we move away from categorizing things according to gender. So that's already I think an important contribution. The second one is that there's the divine feminine and divine male within each of us, and that she's encouraged each of us to explore and develop both the male and female within our characters, and I think that resonates a lot. Certainly represented a lot when we presented in the group last month, and I think it really would resonate a lot in current society, the frameworks in which people think. So those are two of the big points, I think, from last week, and really from the whole book. And now we're moving on to an epilogue. The epilogue is reflections by Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell is one of in my opinion, one of the giants in terms of comparative mythology and comparative religion. He's been involved. I've read, can't say I've read them all, but I've read a lot of his works, many of them more than once. And he doesn't shy away from giving his opinion, but I think he's earned the right to give his opinion because he's dedicated his whole life to these topics and been really very successful. I think very open to different influences. I don't think he had any agenda going into it. He just is trying to share with people what has come out of his studies. He did study he grew up as a Catholic, and then he studied at Columbia University, and then he did graduate studies, including graduate studies over in Germany. He had a hard time finding an initial position, and he was going to give up in his whole effort of teaching comparative mythology and religion until he got an offer to teach at Sarah Lawrence College, which is a very well respected women's college in I think it's upstate New York, maybe Massachusetts. In any event, it is one of those women's colleges in the Northeast United States that really attracts young women from all over the world, the United States, North America, and around the world, and really trains them up into leadership positions. That college and Smith College, I think, are the two best known in that regard. He taught there his whole career, and from that basis was able to participate in many fora on mythology and religion around the world. There was the World Congress of the Congress of World Religions, which was I guess it was held again in Chicago in 1991. That's from memory. And of course, was well known and well received there, but in many other formats. He worked with George Lucas to come up with the Star Wars trilogy. He helped develop the storyline based on his concept of the hero's journey. So he's been, and then he's been feted and celebrated in many different contexts. Towards the end of his career, he was interviewed by Bill Moyers, who was himself a real giant in journalism. He was with PBS and had established such a track record that he was his own editor. He chose his own topics. He was his own producer. And Bill Moyers wanted to do a series with Joseph Campbell, which was extremely well received. Anytime I mention it to someone, they say, "Oh yes, I've seen it," or "Oh yes, I've seen it, and it changed my life," something along those lines. And I think it must have changed my life too. It really opened my eyes. Well, let's say it opened my eyes to many things. It gave me different perspectives in which to think about concepts and issues, topics that had interested me or concerned me throughout my younger life. And I really appreciate what he did in that regard. With that, let's go on now and try to take a look at my PowerPoint. Let's take a look at the PowerPoint, see if I can pull that up. All right. All right, looks like this time it might work to play the video off of the PowerPoint. Okay, so can everyone see my PowerPoint? Okay, the Divine Feminine epilogue with Joseph Campbell. Again, last week, Isabella Price was given the last word about her book. For me, there was another important takeaway: peaceful transformation. As with many of her points, we could talk even more about this, but the one thing that came out for me in the book was that in addition to the hero's journey, which Joseph Campbell talked a lot about, there's also the heroine's quest, which comes out in Isabella Price's book. And one of the differences is that the the goddess quest usually involves some kind of peaceful transformation instead of a violent transformation. They both involve transformation, so the big difference is between peace and violence. The more along that lines, the one of the differences that's been identified, one of the characteristics that's classified or described as feminine is having a broad perspective, an open mind, and the male more focused and limited. And that's true, I think, of transformations. If you're focusing on the big picture, all transformations are just a part of the big picture, and the transformation, viewed from the big picture perspective, the transformations tend to appear as evolutions. Whereas if you're very limited in your focus, the transformation appears revolutionary, very, if you will, more violent. But so again, the feminine, I think, the broader perspective and the way the transformations is brought about is that it comes out through the nature of each thing rather than being imposed on the nature of things. Okay, tonight we're going to do two things. Viewing Bill Moyer's video of Joseph Campbell speaking on the divine feminine. This is divided into, I've divided it into 4 segments, each running 6 to 10 minutes. The whole thing is about 30 minutes. Then we'll discuss each of the segments. Each of the segments touches, I will stop each segment after it's run. So we're going to stop 4 times. And each segment is loosely connected to each other, but Joseph Campbell speaks, is really encouraged, invited to speak in this interview in a wide-ranging manner, and he certainly does that, and he has a wealth of experience to draw upon. So there'll be several topics that are mentioned in each of these segments, and participants are encouraged to discuss and comment on any of those topics or on topics they think are related. In fact, they're really encouraged to. But before we get into that, I want to give a reminder of the purpose for this series. I think that's always worthwhile and would be interesting for those who are joining for the first time, because at this point, the reminders are becoming takeaways. The benefits of the Divine Feminine series are as follows. Number 1, we have raised awareness and expressed gratitude for the Divine Feminine. And that occurs in all kinds of different ways: recognition, acknowledgement, understanding, acceptance, appreciation, respecting, valuing, and promoting. So, if you will, different levels of engagement with the Divine Feminine, all of which are available to all participants. Helping the Divine Feminine to flourish. One of the lines from Isabella Price last week was that the Divine Feminine cannot manifest itself without you. It's not something that's going to come down from on high. It needs to be manifested from within and from each of us. And then I add the point here: 1 step forward might be to disassociate the feminine from gender identification, a point I've already made. And then finally, thinking in more societal terms, to understand the Divine Feminine's significance and potential for contemporary religion, spirituality, and all aspects of contemporary life. Of course, changes like this start, if you will, and I think Isabella agrees with that, starts with the individual, or can be seen as starting with the individual, but then they can have impacts on a societal level. And that's something we haven't thought a lot about in the series. We've touched on it as appropriate throughout the series, but I think Isabella Price in her final presentation placed an emphasis on this point, that all of this study of the mythology and the history and developing awareness and appreciation is good, but it's even better if it can find some manifestation for us in our individual and communal lives. And so these are aspects of the divine feminine that were brought out in the series. The goddess quests, which I've already talked about, the sacred marriage, one of the myths that that conveys this aspect of the divine feminine is the Isis and Osiris myth. It's a very popular one. Isabella told that story last week, and now you'll hear Joseph Campbell tell it again this week. That includes sharing capabilities and responsibilities in a complementary manner. So that can include individually bringing together the masculine and feminine within your own psyche, but then beyond that, working together in different ways other than marriage of man and a woman to found a family. All kinds of teams and groups can work together in a but through sharing capabilities and responsibilities can really amplify their power. Intergenerational transition is one of the topics. That is something that maybe isn't appreciated enough. That one of the big differences between men and women is women give birth to children. I don't know why well, let me put it differently. In going back to the Paleolithic and Neolithic, they were very explicit and graphic about representing the goddess as giving birth, including giving birth to children. And we've gotten away from that kind of explicit and graphic understandings of the divine feminine, but it's really, it's a very important part of life. And then the death, which is, again, it seems that even going way back, the women would take the lead on dealing with death, the death of individuals. That obviously is not the entire story, but the feminine aspect of life is certainly tied in with the proper respect for death. It's again a peaceful transformation. And then you can carry that on with the birth and death going on within a person's life. There often is different births and different deaths within a life as we evolve. Then there's a greater awareness, the next point, a greater awareness of nature, a greater awareness of emotion and intuition. In some of the other meetups we've had with Sri Kant, we've really, he has really pointed out how emotions, intuition, human nature are much broader than just intellectual understandings. And I think that's in line with the feminine. A greater appreciation of inclusivity, harmony, equality in relationships. So these are divine qualities more at the communal level. And then in general, I would say there's a greater awareness of the whole together with an understanding or focus on the parts with the divine feminine, contrasting that with the focus just on specific parts, which people often associate with the masculine. Okay, I've already talked to you about Joseph Campbell's life work and Bill Moyers, so I don't want to talk about that anymore. What I will say is that Joseph Campbell, he does try to make his teachings relevant for the individual, and that's been true in all of his work. And he boiled down all of his, if you will, the life lesson from this worldwide study of mythologies and religion. Encourages people to follow their bliss, follow your bliss. And we could talk more about that later. I don't want to get into that right now, but that's a very interesting topic. The and obviously resonates with a lot of people. All right, the interview segments, Patriarchy and the Goddess. It seems that we can never get away from that. I didn't plan on getting into that topic at all until participants in earlier sessions said they really wanted to talk about that. And so I put together a couple presentations on the patriarchy in ancient Athens and ancient Jerusalem. And Joseph Campbell picks up on exactly the same point here. So that's the first segment. The second segment is the virgin birth. This is, one of those narratives that comes up in the New Testament, only in the Gospel of Luke. It's not in the other Gospels. And he points out that it's that reference in Luke echoes references to other virgin births in other contexts as a way of signaling that this is the birth of an auspicious person. So he'll talk a bit about that, and related topics. Then the third topic is images of the Madonna. Obviously that's related to virgin birth, but it's slightly different. The virgin birth is the creation of a new life. The images of the Madonna is her life in and of itself, and then sustaining other lives. So it's a different aspect of the divine feminine. And finally talks about integration of the feminine and masculine in a way that similar to what is one of the main points Isabel Price was making last week. The other benefit of going over these is that, is introducing everybody to Joseph Campbell, which may well be the topic of another series. In fact, I would propose to present these the entire set of interviews with Bill Moyers, because they're so accessible, and they've been proven to have been significant. They were a significant televised event in terms of the history for many people. So it might be interesting to study that series. It's a bit like Jordan Peterson, who's more recently has had significant impact through his the video presentations of his lectures. Okay, so let's see if I can get this first segment started. Let me see, it starts 27:20. I'm just noting here. The patriarchy and the goddess. All right, so let's see if it doesn't play right off of the PowerPoint, then I can go back to the YouTube. And for some reason today it's not playing. So let me try. How do I get out of the PowerPoint? Stop share?
Yeah, you can stop share, and then you can start to share, and then go to YouTube.
Okay. All right, here we go. This is Bill Moyers.
Cyclopes, each with 50 heads and 100 arms. Uranus was disgusted and forced.
Let me get it started at the right point.
Of life.
There's a little bit here about love. That's another topic he talks about.
Once upon a time, so long ago it no longer matters how.
So can everyone hear? Are you hearing? Okay.
Long ago, the feminine figure of the goddess ruled mythology as the equal of the male. The Greeks even gave her top billing. From chaos, they said, from nothing, came Mother Earth, known as Gaia, and Sky, Uranus. They bedded, and from their coupling came 6 twins known as the Titans, and 3 giants known as Cyclopes, each with 50 heads and 100 arms. Uranus was disgusted and forced him to return to their mother's womb, whereupon an indignant Gaia set out to make him pay for the insult. When Uranus came to their bedroom for his usual favors, she recruited one of their sons to make a sickle, and together they took from Uranus what he was most unwilling to give up and dropped the bloody thing in the sea. The lesson was not lost on the Greeks. It isn't nice to fool with Mother Nature. Joseph Campbell liked that story and told it to me when we were talking one day about how patriarchal authority finally drove the goddess from the pantheon of imagination. Somehow, the old guys figured that if they wanted to control the world, they had to change the metaphors, and the goddess had to go. She remained the symbol of fertility, crucial to humanity's survival, but no equal, except rarely, in the exercise of power. The repercussions have played out down the centuries and are still with us. We return now to our conversation. The Lord's Prayer begins, "Our Father, which art in heaven."
Yeah.
Could it have begun, "Our Mother"?
This is a metaphorical image. This is a symbolic image. And to make the point that it's not your father, your physical father, we have our Father who art in heaven. But heaven again is a symbolic idea. Where it would heaven be? It is no place. All of the references of religious and mythological images are to planes of consciousness or fields of experience potential in the human spirit. And these are to evoke attitudes and experiences that are appropriate to a meditation on the mystery of the source of your own being, I would say. So there have been systems of religion where the mother is the prime parent, the source, and she's really a more immediate parent than the father, because one is born from the mother. Yeah. And then the first experience of any infant is the mother. So that the image of woman is the image of the world. You might say that mythology is simply a translation of the world into a mother image. We talk of Mother Earth and so forth.
But what happened along the way, Joe, to this reverence that in primitive societies was directed toward the goddess figure, the great goddess, the Mother Earth? What happened to that?
That comes in primarily with agriculture and the agricultural societies.
Fertility and all of that?
It has to do with the earth. The human woman does give birth as the earth gives birth to the plants. She gives nourishment as the plants do. So woman magic and earth magic are the same. They are related. And the personification then of this energy which gives birth to forms and nourishes forms is properly female. And so it is in the agricultural world of ancient Mesopotamia, the Egyptian Nile, but also in the earlier planting culture systems that the goddess is the mythic form that is dominant.
Because of this obvious perception of creation issue.
That's right. And when you have a goddess as the creator, it's her own very body that is the universe. She is identical with the universe. And in Egypt, you have the Mother Heavens, Nut, the goddess Nut, who's represented as the whole heavenly sphere.
I was really taken when we went to Egypt upon first seeing the figure of Nut in the ceiling of one of those temples.
Yes, I know the temple.
It's overwhelming.
Yes.
There's one scene of her swallowing the sun.
The idea is that she swallows the sun in the west and gives birth to the sun in the east, and it passes through her body at night. And so she is the heavens.
So it would be natural for people trying to explain the wonders of the universe to look to the female figure as the explanation for what they saw in their own lives.
Not only that, but then when you move to a philosophical point of view, the female represents what in Kantian terminology we call the forms of sensibility. The female represents time and space itself. She is time and space. And the mystery beyond her is beyond pairs of opposites. So it isn't male and it isn't female. It neither is nor isn't. But everything is within her, so that the gods are her children. Everything you can think of, everything you can see is the production of the goddess. Oh, this is a wonderful story. The Vedic gods are together and they see a strange sort of amorphous thing down the way, like a kind of smoky fog. And they say, what's that? They don't know what it is. And Agni, the god of fire, says, I'll go find out who that is. So he goes up to this smoky thing and he says, who are you? And from the smoky thing, this voice says, who are you? And he says, I'm Agni. I'm the Lord of fire. I can burn anything. And out of the fog there comes a piece of straw. It falls on the ground. It says, let's see you burn that. He can't burn it. He goes back, he says, this is strange. Well, Vayu, the Lord of Wind, says, I'll try. So he goes. And the same thing, I can blow anything around. Throws it down. Let's see you blow that. But he can't. Goes back. Then a woman arrives. A beautiful, mysterious, mystic woman. And she instructs the gods and tells them who that is. That is the ultimate mystery of being, from which you, boys, have received your strength, and he can turn it on or off for you, you know? And there she comes as the one who illuminates the gods themselves concerning the ultimate ground of their own being.
It's the female wisdom.
It's the female as the giver of forms. She is the one who gave the forms, and she knows where they came from.
I wonder what it would have meant to us if somewhere along the way we had begun the prayer, our mother, instead of our father. What psychological difference would it have made?
Well, it makes a psychological difference in the character of the cultures. You have the basic birth of civilization in the Near East with the great river valleys then as the main source areas, the Nile, the Tigris Euphrates, and then over in India, the Indus Valley, and later the Ganges. This is the world of the goddess. All these rivers have goddess names, finally. Then there come the invasions. Now, these fighting people are herding people. The Semites are herders of goats and sheep, and the Indo-Europeans of cattle. They were formerly the hunters. They translate a hunting mythology into a herding mythology, but it's animal-oriented. And when you have hunters, you have killers. And when you have herders, you have killers, because they're always in movement, nomadic, coming into conflict with other people, and they have to conquer the area they move into. This comes into the Near East, and this brings in the warrior gods, like Zeus, like Yahweh.
The sword and death instead of fertility.
Right, particularly the Hebrews. They really wipe out the goddess. The term for the goddess, the Canaanite goddess that's used in the Old Testament, is the abomination. And so many of the Hebrew kings are condemned in the Old Testament for having worshipped on the mountaintops. That's the goddess. And there was a very strong accent against the goddess in the Hebrew, which you do not find in the Indo-European. There you have Zeus marrying the goddess, and then the two play together. I think it's an extreme case that we have in the Bible. And our own Western subjugation of the female is really, I think, a function of biblical thinking.
Because when you substitute the male for the female, you get a different psychology, a different cultural bias.
Particularly if you cut the female out and don't have any I mean, if the male is on top like this, and the female is the subordinate all the way, you have a totally different system from that when the two are facing each other.
And it's permissible in your culture to do what your gods do. So you just,
Well, that's exactly it. So I would see three situations here. One, the early one of the sheer goddess, when the male is hardly a significant divinity. You see, she is the total thing. And then this other one of the Hebrew, of the goddess, the male, the total thing. In fact, he takes over her role. And finally, then the classical one, where the two are in interaction.
there are women.
Okay. Am I back on?
Yes.
So that's the first segment, and it was the patriarchy and the goddess. We covered that in a couple different videos. It's touched on briefly by Isabella Price in her book. And as promised, it's a rather wide-ranging discussion that was taking place between Bill Moyers and Joseph Campbell. They touched on many topics other than the law, the role of divine feminine within the historically the role of divine feminine within the patriarchies. So I personally am now ready to open it up for questions and comments, and even questions and comments among the participants on this rather wide-ranging discussion going on between Bill Moyers and Joseph Campbell. Is there anything that resonates with you? Anything that surprised you? A big takeaway? David Miller has something.
Oh, wait, before you do that, Brian, so if anyone has any questions or comments, you can type exclamation point in chat or raise your hand in Zoom.
So David Miller.
David, you should be able to unmute. Let me make sure.
Okay, yes. With the Bible, the Old Testament, what we have to be careful about is to distinguish between those who wrote the Bible and what those ancient Israelite Judean people actually believed. And even the Bible itself will tell you that condemns them, both the Israelites and the Judeans, for being polytheistic. And of course, that goddess Asherah, what was worshipped as a fertility goddess, little terracotta type statuettes that they hung from trees, and the Bible keeps mentioning it. Now, the interesting thing that there was, it's a bit of a shock to say that the ancient Israelites were polytheistic, and they had all these other beliefs and gods of the surrounding gods, and it's only two kings who actually managed to try to quell that, and they're the only two kings that the Old Testament Judean kings see as righteous. Only two of them, for two short periods, did we have anything like monotheism. Monolatry is the technical term for it, one God for one people. Otherwise, they were polytheistic. So that Asherah or however you want to pronounce her, was actually worshipped as the fertility goddess, not just as for some people, she was the spouse of their main god, Yahweh. But yeah, so it's very interesting once you start looking at it. And you've got to remember that the Bible authors condemn both all the Israelites and the Judeans and their kings, except for those two kings I just mentioned, as being, not walking in the way of God. In other words, being polytheistic. So what we're taught is not quite, what the scholars realise. Thank you.
Thank you for that, David. The one of those kings was Josiah. The other, who was the other one? There, David, of course.
Hezekiah. He's about 720 BC, and
Yeah.
Josiah about 60, 70 years later, and he dies in 609, trying to stop the Egyptians from helping the Assyrians. And here's the scholars are claiming that the Messiah, the belief in a Messiah, developed out of that King Josiah, which is also not what we're normally, not what's normally mentioned. So it gets very interesting once you really start going into it.
So we did, as I said, we did one presentation about Jerusalem in this period of time, and that's where these kings resided. And it really was a back and forth between the time of David, who was somewhat a legendary figure, but the details I don't think have been archaeologically established, but who was probably he brought in a warrior god. He had a shepherd band that came up from the south of Jerusalem and conquered Jerusalem. And his son Solomon was polytheistic, worshipped divine goddesses, married foreign women, lots of foreign women, and I think took on board also their goddesses. And then it was just back and forth from one generation to the next until you got to Josiah. Each of these was connected with the push towards monolateralism, with the predominance and exclusive worship of Yahweh, was usually tied in with some political goal. And if we study further in the history, the political goals that were tied with that, the exclusive worship of Yahweh, were never achieved. In general, just in summary, the kings the kings of Judah, which was really just a small part of Canaan, and well, it's a very small part of even what the Israelites called Israel. So the kings of Judah wanted to conquer the northern kingdom, centered around Samaria, the Sumerians, and they were never able to do that. The Sumerians were the ones who tended to worship Asherah and probably others. So it is really a fascinating history it never was worked out. And then the Babylonians came in and put an end to that with the exile to Babylon. And then when the Israelites returned, of course, it wasn't all the Israelites, it was just the Judeans who had been taken captive, and they reestablished Ezra and Nehemiah reestablished a monotheism. And the people who stayed behind were supposed to once again abandon their foreign wives. Many of them did, but not all of them. There's a list in the Bible of the families who did not. So they were condemned. But it's yes, that's been the push in that the history. The Hebrew to Jewish history. I think that's fairly well established. Now, the way we've talked about it in this meetup, where we're talking about the goddess and what happened to the goddess, is presented as a negative thing, which is why I really didn't want to get into it. But some people think it's positive that this all happened. So I really leave it up to each of you to decide. Anybody else?
I have something actually. One of the things going into this review, which I thought was really helpful, brought it back, is when you talked about the feminine figure being, in a sense, in control of life or death, like being in charge of it, and bringing in life and bringing in death. And I don't think I ever connected that before. However, it's a beautiful thing because it's cyclical, right? Like we always talk about things being cyclical, especially when talking about the divine feminine, this, it's like especially in the Indian religion, um, the birth, the death, and you saw that with the presentation on the Indian goddesses um, that Rupali did, and you saw them being in charge of life and in charge of death. You saw it in Kali and destruction, and you saw the various Indian goddesses in life. So I just like that was a great connection. And I think in the interview, um, I love when when Joseph Campbell said that women are the magic and that women magic and earth magic is the same because the feminine brings into life and nourishes, and so does the earth. And we hear many times where it's talked about Mother Earth, and there's a reason for that. And you know, I think it's one of those things. And I just wanted to point out, I think Jesus, in a sense, brings it balance to it, to what they did in the Old Testament and the New Testament, in that he involved various women in his work, and that, you know, arguably one of the first apostles, if you take apostles by the technical definition of people who um, spread the gospel across the land, was Mary Magdalene. And I don't think that's by accident, that she was the first person, she was the apostle to the apostles, and that she brought the good news that Jesus had risen from the dead. And you got to think about, like, why would Jesus reveal himself to her first if the male was supposed to be dominant? And I think he was just trying to bring balance, which we talked about too throughout the series. Bringing this balance, like no one figure, like masculine and feminine aren't, one is not dominant. It's kind of like a balance, and looking at it not as gender, which I think that's where we got in trouble when we looked at it as gender. Um, but bringing that balance back, and I think it's slowly but surely coming back. Uh, but we have to remember, and I think that's something that we as humans always mess up, is that we want something to dominate. We want it to be a dominant space. Like something has to take control, right? Not recognizing that sometimes, yes, masculine needs to be in control, and sometimes, yes, feminine needs to be in control. So that's what I wanted to bring up.
Yeah, those are excellent points. Yeah, transformations are, and the role that the feminine plays in transformation are really important. And like you said, I think the Indian traditions that have been explained to me, I think cover it really nicely, with that the power of the forms is the feminine. The form is the masculine, and the power behind them, or that gives shape to them, is the feminine, something that Joseph Campbell touched on again. So the transformation itself is seen as having a feminine character.
Yeah. So up next we have Penny, followed by Mona.
Okay. I just wanted to, can you hear me?
Yes.
Am I echoing? Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, I thought it was, which came out in what Joseph Campbell was saying, I think that back in the times of the goddess, that there was an integration of humanity with the rest of the world, the rest of the universe, because the goddess embodied all of that. And with the patriarchal religions, then man became dominant. And man became dominant over nature. And he became dominant over women, the female, because they had separated humankind from the world, the entire universe. They considered it something extra. outside of the regular world, and they were dominant, and the world was just supposed to meet all of their needs, and they could take anything they want. And I just feel like since this attitude has prevailed in Western society, that's part of the reason we're having a climate crisis right now and global warming, because there was not a respect for the earth and having a sustainable relationship with the earth. And I think that part of the good that could come from a more recognition of the divine feminine or feminine attributes is, again, sustainability and living in harmony with the earth.
Yeah, those are really good points. The man becomes dominant over nature and the females, and it's social instead of it's socially oriented rather than naturally oriented. Focuses on city and culture rather than nature. Actually that's a point that Joseph Campbell also makes in a different context, that the feminine, the goddess religions in history tended to be nature worship, and the male dominated, the warrior religions tended to be more culture oriented, and they would come in with all kinds of rules, societal rules that didn't necessarily exist with the goddess worship. And it's like creating rules for a band of people, quite a separate, as Penny said, separate and apart from what the natural order might be. You can see that also, these things run deep. You can see that in the, talk about goddess worship and God worship. The goddess worship tended to be out in nature. It would, in the Canaanite areas that were worshiping the goddess, the worshiping happened on the hilltops, under trees and in groves, outward looking in nature and outward looking. Whereas the God worship would happen in temples and in tents. It's cut off from nature and inward looking. A very, very different concept, even of the idea of worship. The worship is very different. Another difference between tended to be differences in mode of worship is that the goddess worship is much more decentralized, and the God worship tended towards centralization, and that tied in with the political aspirations of the Judean kings. They were always looking to centralize the power for the purpose of political aims, and the goddess worship really was seen as antithetical to that. There are other parallels can be drawn. The Indo-Europeans had initiation rites for young men, which was called the wolf year, or something along those lines, wolf year or wolf initiation, where the young men would go out and they would have to prove themselves by raiding and killing other villages. So they'd have to live on their own wits for a year, and then they could come back, and then they would be integrated into the society. So these were the curios. I think they're fair. Some people don't accept it as established fact, but many people do. And the curios really epitomizes the essence of these warrior bands as raiders. They don't create things, they take things that have already been created, they take them from other people, and then you can transpose that onto nature. The warrior religions, these raiding bands, then would have no trouble with taking things from nature without replenishing. Then the raiders would just go away until the cultures and the agricultural areas had created another surplus, and then they'd come back in. And that's a little bit, if you will, that's a clear parallel with how we're treating Mother Earth at this point. Anybody else?
Mona.
Yes, thank you. I was very interested in this presentation about distinction that was made between like when introducing the divine feminine, just to steer clear from gender identification. But I noticed how much of the discussion kind of slipped into that, like gender identity, because we're talking about women and men, and we're talking about patriarchy. And I was interested to explore how much of this exploration of divine feminine has to do with the inside, like the feminine part and the masculine part that's within everyone. And then when you were talking about the various positions in which the gods and the goddesses find each other, I was interested in whether or not that could be an inner state of affairs. Like, how do we feel within ourselves? Like one part has to be dominant, but how often does it happen that we see it in an interplay, like a dance, right? Without any one particular side dominating the other necessarily.
Well, those are great questions. On the first point, I think you're right. I mean, I personally am still struggling with separating these qualities and characteristics from gender identification. The other aspect of that, I think, is there's probably something to that gender identification, as evidenced by these very long-standing metaphors. With the women had certain roles, men had certain roles. That obviously is a source for further extensive discussion. But some of the female roles tended to require more patience, focus on children and cooperation in achieving certain goals within a group of women that I guess that would justify the gender identification, but justify it back in that period of time. Now we're trying to get away from that because it's no longer reflects the societal realities, the societal opportunities, the flexibility, tolerance, and freedoms that we have today. But still, I have to say, I'm still kind of tied up in those things, and I do try to get away from it. I don't know what other words. I guess I do interchangeably use feminine and female, but I'd like to get away from that. Maybe we could come up with other words for it. I don't know. But I think that's a very good point. What were the other? I forgot now that the other.
Well, my other concern was whether one could focus more on the inner journey rather than the externals. I mean, both, but also see it as a reflection of what happens with a personal transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. And Joseph Campbell points to that, I think, later in this presentation, if not in this one, then in another one. The Isabella Price really emphasized that last week. I think those of us who were involved in preparing the presentations have really taken that on board. It's just the way Joseph Campbell puts it, is all these goddess worship, if you will, that we've really was the object of our study, a rather historical phenomenon, is really just a projection of our psyche in a way that enables us to understand ourselves better.
Um, Thank you, Mona. I just wanted to add one thing. I put the Divine Feminine series in the chat. It's the full playlist. And the reason why I think we talked throughout those various presentations about the difference between gender roles and the role that they play. I think Brian in particular did some brilliant studies on this, and he did some brilliant research on how the patriarchy came to be in the gender roles as opposed to energies. Because I think especially in the first of the series we talk about it in more detail about you know, that masculine and feminine are not gender specific, um, and that there are in each of us. And so when you study it's a balance. It's like it's a series of energies, right? That's the way I look at it anyway, and that's the way I've studied it. It's energy, um, and in the first presentation in particular, there's a slide in there that identifies it. But what's in particular is that women could be dominant in masculine energies, but it doesn't take away from their femininity in any way. It's just an energy as opposed to a gender role. Um, so I think that might help. If you just look through and you could pick the ones that you want to watch in particular, but I would recommend the first one. I would also recommend Brian, do you remember the title of the ones where you talked about how the patriarchy came to be? Do you remember the titles of
One
those?
on Athens, I think the goddess in Athens, and one the goddess in Jerusalem. Iron Age Athens.
1, 2,
Iron
3.
Age Jerusalem. What?
Sorry, I didn't know my mic was on.
Oh, and then the other was, I have to flag also Penny's presentation on the Minoan. I thought she did of all the presentations, did the best. First, the Minoan culture is very, very interesting. It's unique in that it is the oldest of or the most recent really, other than the Osha in Africa, of the Mediterranean. It is the longest standing of the goddess traditions. And she did a great job in showing the parallels between the role of the goddess in the religion and the role of women in society. I thought that was really well done. Together with, she explained some myths and how they evolved from the female or from the feminine version, the goddess worship version, into the male worship version. So that some of the myths we've taken on board as being the hero's journey may well have started out as the heroine's quest. So I thought there were some really good things in her presentation on the Minoans, Crete.
Yeah, I will put those in the chat. I'm going to put the ones about, I saw the title as soon as you said it. I was like, I saw that title. So I'm going to put the particular titles in, that way you don't have to go through the whole series if you don't want to, Mona. And for everyone else as well. And I'll put Penny's in because that was really brilliant for the Minoan civilization. So I will definitely be putting those in for you throughout the night. So up next, I have Will.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to say how refreshing that was to hear the term "our mother who art in heaven," because I've often thought, why would God be a man? Females give birth to things. However, unfortunately, females have been absolutely dominated by males of the species for so long. And I just wonder if we had that perspective represented by a term, "our mother, thou art in heaven," how different things might be. Females are not perfect, I know that much, but they are far better option than the male of the species, who is extremely destructive, egotistical, and will forego or become violent to get the ultimate outcome. So yeah, I just wish "our mother, thou art in heaven" had been adopted a long time ago, and not this anthropomorphic, selfish view of the world as decreed by the male of the species. That's all I wanted to say. Very refreshing to hear that term, our mother, thou art in heaven. Thank you.
Thank you for that. You know, there's been talk about in these discussions how to separate the, you know, trying to separate masculine and feminine qualities and characteristics from male, female gender roles. A good example of that is the one that was cited by Joseph Campbell, the newt, that really it is possible and appropriate to get away from that, because in the Egyptian mythology, the sky, the deity of the sky was the sky goddess, Nut. And that's not the case in Greece and many other cultures. The divinity of the sky is male. So there obviously is a lot of flexibility in how you depict these characteristics, and it is appropriate to get away from the male female. Another thing I'd say about that is at the very beginning, he said that from that female came before male. Gaia came before Uranus. Uranus is the sky god for the Greeks. And but he said before that there was nothing, there was chaos. Chaos is neither male nor female. So already in these old mythologies, they recognized that there's a ground of being, there's an ultimate reality, which is neither male nor female. So that, you know, that brings me to a point that I personally think deserves more attention. It ties into the sacred marriage. And that is that a lot of things that are created are combinations of things. We have many, many different combinations of things, and the combining things is a creative exercise, combining different things. And so to get there in the first place, or to understand the nature of combinations, I think some of these old wisdom traditions look to the human as a metaphor for combining for the purpose of creating something new, and that's male and female, the male and female sexes, which are clearly different, combining to make new life. And that just became a metaphor and an analogy that they followed through in many, many different ways, sometimes no longer appropriate. And the Indian, I think the Indian tradition also, and also have to say the Chinese appreciate there is an ultimate reality which is neither male nor female. Brahman, I believe, is neither male nor female, and in China also, although there's yin and yang, there's the Tao, the way, which is neither male nor female. So there is recognition of a fundamental reality, and if you will, one of the insights that is obtained from thinking about male and female is that many things, the 10,000 things in the world are created through many, many combinations. It's more like a chemical understanding of nature than a physical or physics understanding. Anybody else have anything?
JP typed exclamation point in the chat.
Good evening. In response to Will about the use of the word father, different opinions are out there. One I picked up is that had Yeshua, Jesus, actually used mother or father, mother, he might not have been listened to as much as he was. So he chose the easy way out, and supposedly in some of his parables that he had given to his disciples, he had spoken different parables in different ways. So he may have actually taught the disciples differently, and that's why he had more women as apostles than we may not even have known about. We just knew about the ones who were more outspoken, as you mentioned, Ebony. Mona had mentioned about the inner journey. And I've heard Shrikant also talk about the chakras and the Kundalini. You probably already did this in part of the series. You mentioned Rupini, I forget her name, having mentioned the Hindu gods and goddesses. The Lord's Prayer, as I've once read it, is actually the distribution of the chakras going down. And so those are the different aspects of Shiva to reach the Shakti element below to rise the serpent up the Sushumna channel, if anybody's familiar with that. So there are, in some correlations, the chakras into the New Testament that Yeshua speaks about, the Lord's Prayer and the Beatitudes. I'm not sure if anybody has read those things. I just wanted to throw some information out. Thank you.
That's very interesting. I'll take a look back at the Lord's Prayer. The Kundalini and the chakras are discussed by Joseph Campbell in detail as we proceed through this through the video. Maybe we're reaching a point where it's time to move on, but Evanique, do other people have points?
I think JP was the last one, so whenever you're ready, you can move forward.
All right, let's take a look at the next segment, which is dealing with virgin birth.
Upgrade today, get complimentary smartphone.
Okay, let me. So I need to share screen. There's sound. Here we go. Try again. Okay, we're sharing screen. Here we go. This is virgin birth.
Today who say that the spirit of the goddess has been in exile for 5,000 years since the events
Well,
that
not that, you can't put it that far back, 5,000 years. She was a very potent figure in Hellenistic times in the Mediterranean. And she came back with the Virgin in the Roman Catholic tradition. I mean, you don't have a tradition with the goddess celebrated any more beautifully and marvelously than in the 12th and 13th century French cathedrals, every one of which is called Notre Dame.
What about the virgin birth? Suddenly the goddess reappears in the form of the chaste and pure vessel chosen for God's action.
Well, in the history of Western religions, this is an extremely interesting development. The virgin birth comes in by way of the Greek tradition. When you read your four Gospels, the only one with the virgin birth in it is the Gospel according to Luke, and Luke was a Greek.
And there was in the Greek tradition images, legends, myths of virgin birth?
All of them. I mean, the Leda and the swan and Persephone and the serpent and this one and that one and the other one. The virgin birth is represented throughout.
This was not a new idea then in Bethlehem and...
No, what is the meaning of the virgin birth? In India, there's this the system of the Kundalini, as it's called, the idea of the centers, psychological centers up the spine. And they represent the psychological planes of concern and consciousness and action. First is at the rectum, and this is that of alimentation. The serpent represents this, you know, a traveling esophagus going along, just eating, 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 eating. And all of us we wouldn't be here if we weren't eating. And then the second center is at the sex organ center, and that's the urge to procreation. The third center is at the navel. This is where you eat and want to consume. And it's not the alimentary eating, it's the mastering and smashing and trashing of others. You see, this is the aggressive mode. Now, the first is an animal instinct. The second is an animal instinct. The third is an animal instinct. And these three centers are located in the pelvic basin, you see. Mm-hmm. The next one is at the level of the heart. And this is the opening of compassion. And there you move out of the field of animal action into a field that is properly human and spiritual. Now, In each of these centers, there is a symbolic form. At the base, the first one, there is the form of the lingam and yoni, the male and female organs in conjunction. At the heart chakra, there is again the male and female organs in conjunction, but in gold. This is the virgin birth. It's the birth of spiritual man out of the animal man. Do you understand?
And it happens
when you are awakened at the level of the heart to compassion and suffering with the other person. That's the beginning of humanity. And the meditations of religion properly are on that level, the heart level.
You say it's the beginning of humanity, but in these stories, that's the moment when gods are born, the virgin birth. It's a God who emerges from that chemistry.
And you know who that God is? It's you. All of the symbols in mythology refer to you. You can get stuck out there and think it's all out there. And so you're thinking of Jesus and all the sentiments about how he suffered and all. What that suffering is what ought to be going on in you. Have you been reborn? Have you died to your animal nature and come to life as a human incarnation?
Why is it significant that this is of a virgin?
Well, it is that the begetter is the spirit. It is a spiritual birth. The virgin conceived of the word, but through the ear.
The word came like a shaft of light.
Yes. And now the Buddha was born from his mother's side at the level of the heart chakra. That's a symbolic birth. He wasn't born from his mother's side, but symbolically he was.
But the Christ came the way you and I come.
Yes, but of a virgin.
Which is a power greater than...
And then, according to Roman Catholic doctrine, her virginity was restored. So nothing happened physically, you might say. It's not a physical birth. It's symbolic of a spiritual transformation. That's what the virgin birth's about. And so deities are born that way, who represent beings who act in terms of compassion and not in terms of the lower three centers.
If you go back into antiquity, do you find images of the Madonna as the mother of the Savior child?
Well, what you have as the model for the Madonna actually is Isis with her child Horus at her breast. This was the actual model for the Madonna symbol.
Isis? Tell me that story.
Okay, I've interrupted, let's see. Oh, sure. So again, rather arbitrarily, I've stopped here. Now the story gets more and more into the Madonna. So after the birth, there's then the role of the mother captured in the Madonna, and I've stopped it there so we can talk a little bit more about the virgin birth. And I thought this was really one of the better segments in the video. It tied together things I had never thought about. The thing that struck me the most was the Kundalini, and how it's reflected. The chakra at the base has a birth symbolism, the union of male and female, and then again at the heart, there's the same symbol of rebirth, the union of male and female, to enter the human realm. I had never heard it explained that way, and I thought that was really, really enlightening for me. Did others have comments about this section or anything else we've seen?
If anyone has any questions or comments, you can type exclamation point in the chat or raise your hand in Zoom. And while people are lining up, I have to say, when he was talking about the virgin birth and the birth of spiritual human out of an animal one, I had never actually thought of the virgin birth like that. That is the birth that's spiritual, but it makes total sense because in if you talk about it in terms of Mary and Jesus, which is the one I'm most familiar with, um, Jesus being 100% human and 100% divine, God's divinity went into Mary. God's divinity became a part of Mary, and the simple fact that she was carrying um, the the child of God, and that it didn't happen by normal sexual relations, and that in that being the way in which um the spiritual man is born. But if you think about it, it makes total sense because through Jesus, who's the savior, um all of us are saved. All of us realize our own humanity and our own divinity. And I like what Joseph Campbell talked about towards the end of that segment. He talked about, in reality, uh you know the human, it's our journey. It's the story of our journey, and Jesus' journey is the story of our journey. And that if we're not having trials or tribulations, or I hate to say tribulations, that's so dramatic, but like if we're not having problems or conflicts, are we growing spiritually? Are we looking at it that way? So I this was really enlightening. So I have any thoughts before I go into people? I see Joe and Mona have their hands are lined up to speak.
I'm fine.
Okay. Joe.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting things as far as the idea that we have a physical birth that comes into the world, and that's our physical being. And then what Joseph Campbell is alluding to is a different perspectives on how we are spiritually reborn, and the renewal that comes along with that. There, it is interesting to think about the contexts as well, that these two, he's equating the idea, the overall idea of rebirth in this in this video. But I think that there are maybe some nuances in between the two when you get down into the details as to when you're talking about the divinity of Mary and the chakras. I do think that there are some distinctions to be made, and that ultimately, if you think about the idea of rebirth in the terms of Christianity, it is something that comes through an external source. It's a rebirth from within, but it does come from the idea of finding Christ, and that this is something that can be only achieved through a not it's not something that is achieved solely through a human effort. And I think that that's where it's a little bit different. Neither is actually achieved through a human effort per se, but one, it seems to be more external and the other one seems to be more internal, in my opinion, between the two. And that's even though we're talking about overall the same thing, the transformation of an individual being born from above again, and finding the light, so to speak. But I do think that there's some distinctions, and sometimes that it's important to see the commonalities, but it's also important to see the differences.
You're drawing differences between the Kundalini and the virgin birth?
Yes, the virgin birth. I think that the similarity is rebirth, but the distinction of what the meaning behind them. And I think that also is representative of the times that they were, and the way the myths themselves develop, as well, whether it be through the church, and a more monotheistic approach versus a more a non-monotheistic.
That raises a lot of questions. I'm trying to put my finger on what.
I'm trying to figure out how to explain it myself. I would have to really think about it, because there's something it takes a deep knowledge of both. But I would say the most important thing here is to not overlook the contextual information that comes, like the contextual situations where these myths have emerged from, and helping understand both what they mean on a more metaphysical level and a physical level.
All right, if I could just, let me give some feedback, and maybe this will trigger more thoughts for you.
Just answers, no feedback.
All right, then I'll have to hold my tongue. But the Kundalini example, that's something that can happen and is presented as something that can happen to any of us. The rebirth of Buddha was added using that model. I don't think the rebirth of Buddha was a part of original Buddhism, or the birth out of the side that evolved later. Whereas, and this is just a difference of emphasis, with the Kundalini, it's something that could happen to all of us, and it's sort of a physiological representation of a psychic event. The other is a historical representation of a psychic event. It's something that happened once to somebody else. And from that, you could extrapolate that, as indicated by Joseph Campbell, it's also something that can happen to you. It is in the church too. The baptism is the rebirth in the spirit. So there's a ritual that ties back into that, to that historical event. Is that distinction between a psychological, physiological event that for each of us and a historical event that happened with somebody else, does that at all put a finger on what you were talking about?
Yeah, it does. Absolutely. I mean, what I'm saying is that at a higher level that they are getting at the same thing, but in how they actually arrive at those conclusions are very different. And it's very important to understand those differences in order to develop an appreciation for both of what cultures are actually bringing together, like as far as their explanation of rebirth, and to appreciate the differences and then kind of almost if you're on your personal journey, then yes, you would really kind of want to know the nuances between those two. But I think Joseph Campbell's absolutely correct in saying that this is, about becoming again, and there's something very deep to that. Anyway, and that's all. The journey is a little different for both, but that takes a lot of different research as well. And I mean, even there's some deviation from in the Protestant belief systems as far as virginity goes and the rebirth. So there's that aspect of it as well. Understanding even why there's deviation between those two is very important. So, and you can kind of see historically, and this is where I kind of we've gone over this in actually David Miller's group, the evolution of Christianity in its various forms. And I just don't have all the names. He has all the names committed to memory, all the different groups and the various belief systems within them. But that's a little bit off topic. But nonetheless, it gives you an idea of the thinking that each group has in explaining this idea of rebirth.
Did anybody else have something?
Up next, we have Mona.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to say that I really appreciated this segment because it addressed exactly my question that I've asked before regarding the inner journey and thinking of how all of these issues that we bring up are, we can take them literally, but we could also think of them as symbols. And Campbell was actually very clear about that how the virgin birth is a symbol. If you are to place it in a context of the Greek culture that preceded, right, everything else. So I really, really appreciated that other perspective that I could see how a symbol can address something that's inside, like my journey and your journey and everyone else's, rather than just focusing on the historical outer reality.
Before we go to the next comment, I'd like to point out we seem to be, and I also am using interchangeably virgin birth and rebirth. And there might be a difference there. I'm not sure that they can always be conflated to be the same thing. With the virgin birth or giving rise to something, the new person that did not, let's say it did not exist in the past. And with rebirth, you're transforming, in the context we're using it, transforming an individual or person who did exist in the past. And the difference is, to continue with the metaphor, the difference would be that there's a death involved in the rebirth and there's no death involved in the virgin birth. Is anybody hearing me? Yeah. Oh, I didn't see anybody's face moving. So, okay. And that's there's pain and tragedy involved in that, sadness, grief, all that, letting go, difficulty, pain in the death. That's this transformation that we characterize as rebirth because it's preceded and entails some kind of a death, a letting go, whereas that's not really the case in the virgin birth. So the rebirth, I think, is more difficult. And the rebirth that some of us are pointing to is probably the rebirth we experience within our lives. Again, it's metaphorical, but it does capture the idea that you need to let go of some parts of yourself to move on in a new way. I think Katie had something, didn't she?
Actually, Paul was before Katie.
Oh, okay.
Hi, thanks. Referring to Joe's point about sort of the difference, and also what is the whole drive to define a virgin birth? And I'm thinking about Krishna and Arjuna and the way that it seems to me in that kind of tradition, the divinity can just manifest in a form that is human. Because what we're really trying to do here is solve the dilemma that we seem to want to have beings that are both divine and flesh and blood at the same time. And the virgin birth solves that problem in a way, because there was the divinity that was the father, and then the woman is the flesh and blood, so it kind of solves that problem. Whereas in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna can just manifest in whatever form he wants, and he changes right in front of Arjuna to, something awe-inspiring and all that. So it's really, 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 really different solutions to the thing that we all seem to need in these traditions of a divine, but also flesh and blood being. And once you have that, and you can know that you can find that divinity in yourself, then you see the interconnectedness of everything, which is really more than the feminine masculine dichotomy, the thing that makes one not mistreat the environment and not mistreat others, because you're seeing their divinity as yours, which is not a masculine feminine thing. It's a whole different thing. So I just thought I'd mention some other angles on it in the discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, I like that each of us, there's a lot in what you said. One thing that struck me is that each of us, whether we're masculine or feminine, we're a combination, like I'm a male, we're a combination of masculine and feminine in our origin. And I embody both of those, and the divine and the natural. Okay, I like that.
Thank you, Paul. Up next, I have Katie.
Yeah, sometimes for the Gospel of John, we go back to the Greek words, and I think it helps also to go back to the Hebrew words for this one. So it wasn't the word, and I don't know exactly what the word they used, but it actually meant a young woman, and the implication was that she was a virgin. So I think that's important to go back to the original, to find the original word for Mary.
Oh, that's a good, well, I know nothing about that, but that's an interesting perspective. Does anybody know about the original words?
Are you asking about the meaning of the word Mary?
No, if she was referred to as a virgin in the Bible, it wasn't in English, it was probably in Greek and Hebrew. What were the Greek and Hebrew words, and what did they really mean? That's my understanding of Katie's question. And I do not have any knowledge there. Constance is chiming in here. Maybe she does.
Yeah, when in the same meeting with Gospel of John with Shirkant, we were talking about it because Shirkant's really been studying the Bible in a beautiful way and going back to the initial language. And I remember, because it had such an impact on me, virgin could have meant a woman that had never given birth. So if it's that would be she was a virgin, she hasn't given birth, or a young woman. So it didn't necessarily mean virgin as we think of virgin today. I don't know if that gives more input, but Shirkant did a lot of investigation on that. It was just brilliant.
Well, to the extent it's not virgin as we understand the word, I guess it's taking away from the concept of immaculate conception.
Yeah, actually, somewhat. I'm still confused on it, and I don't know if I'm sitting here and it's hard for me to even talk because my mind is just crashing. I've studied Kundalini meditation for 30 years. So I have a little bit of a different perception on that, but that's all right. But I still don't understand. And Ebony, you said it. So why do the churches keep saying there was a virgin birth? Because according to what Joseph Campbell, if I've got it right, it wasn't a virgin birth. I'm still confused on this. So.
Well, if I can, I don't think, just based on the excerpt I just heard, I don't think Joseph Campbell is saying it's not a virgin birth.
Okay. I'm going to re-listen to it after. This has just been, I have to tell you, this is just an incredible meeting. I'm just soaking so much in that this is just terrific. So I'm going to listen to the whole thing again. This is great. Thank you so much.
What do you think about the Kundalini as discussed by Joseph Campbell? Constance?
Yes, yes. Actually, the lower chakras, and in meditation, what we would do is go through, there's then the heart, the throat, into the higher. And what our emphasis was, I'd love to know more about it, frankly, if, Kundalini, I'd love to, from people that really know it. I think there's someone in this group that does have a lot of information about it, but it was like, we would meditate and breathe through the root chakra up through the crown chakra to open up any blockage, because if you're blocked in those lower chakras. And so I'm not probably that good at explaining it, but anyway, thank you so much. My mind is just, there's so much tonight I can barely think. Thank you.
Evanique, do you want to call it? I notice Carly has something.
Yes, I had to step away for part of that. So, Carly, if you have anything, please.
Yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry, Brian, did you have something first?
No, I think Constance I asked her a question and she answered it. So I think we're ready to move on to the next.
Okay, Carly, go ahead.
thanks. No, very quickly. I cannot find any of my sources, but in the past when I've studied this, that was one specific thing that had been looked at deeply in different translations too. I think the original Greek was young woman, and somebody had mentioned that. And the concept of a young woman or girl wasn't necessarily birth related, but it did get its emphasis after the Council of Nicaea, but moreover with the patriarchal kind of takeover of that domination aspect of the virgin birth not being as dominant as it was about an idea of purity rather than an idea of sexual purity, which are different metaphoric concepts, I guess. That's all I had to, my 2 cents. I'll try to find resources and put them in the chat if I find it though. Thanks.
So maybe young women, the word Greek or Hebrew that was used, young, let's say it was young woman, but it implied innocence and purity in that way, and openness. Or, along that's interesting, along those lines. Something psychic rather than physical.
Up next, we have Joe.
Yeah, just actually going off of like something that JP has put in, it's the idea of awakening. In a way, this is we're talking about the idea of being self-aware. I mean, that's essentially what we're getting down to, is what does it mean to be aware of oneself? So I think when we're talking about, rebirth, that's essentially, this is the an attempt to explain our awareness of self, and that's an awakening, as was just put in the chat here.
Yeah, I think that's good. I mean, if you were to push me, I think that's what I would say is the ultimate of the meaning of the rebirth for us today, in the way we think now. Anybody else?
I don't see anyone lined up, so whenever you're ready.
Okay, let's go. We're gonna change aspect a little bit from the virgin birth to the Madonna. So from the person giving birth to the person sustaining life. Let's see if I can get that started.
This is a prime myth in this period.
He's talking about Osiris, or excuse me, Isis, the Greek goddess. The Egyptian goddess, sorry.
Of the goddess as the redeemer, the one who goes in quest of the lost spouse or lover, and through her loyalty and descent into the realm of death recovers him. Isis and her husband Osiris were twins who were born of the goddess Nut. And their younger relatives were Set and Nephthys, who were also twins born from Nut. Set planned to kill his brother Osiris. And he took Osiris's measurements secretly and had a wonderful sarcophagus built that would exactly fit Osiris. So there was a hilarious party in progress one time among the gods, and Set trots in this sarcophagus and he says, anyone whom this perfectly fits can have it as his sarcophagus. And everybody at the party tried. And when Osiris got in, of course, he perfectly fit. Just at that time, 72 accomplices come rushing out and they clap the lid on and strap it together and throw it in the Nile. Now, this is the death of the god. Whenever you have a death of an incarnation, a god like this, you're going to have a resurrection. You can wait for that. So he goes floating down the Nile and is washed ashore in Syria. And a beautiful tree grows up and incorporates the sarcophagus in its own trunk. So this is this wonderful tree with glorious aroma. And the local king has just had a son born to him. And he is also at the same time going to build a palace. The aroma of this tree is so wonderful. He cuts it down and brings it in to be a central pillar in the main room of the palace. Poor little Isis, whose husband has been thrown into the Nile, starts this wonderful quest for Osiris. So she comes to the place where the palace is and learns of the wonderful aroma. And she suspects this is Osiris. And she gets a job as nurse to the just born little child. Well, she lets the child nurse from her finger. And she loves the little child, and she decides to give it immortality. So she does this by placing him in the fireplace, in the fire, to burn away gradually his mortal body. But at being a goddess, she could keep that from killing it, you understand? And when that would happen, she would convert herself into a swallow and fly mournfully around the pillar where her husband is. Well, one evening, the child's mother came into this room while this scene was in progress, saw her child in the fireplace, let out a scream, and that broke the spell, and they had to rescue the child from incineration. Meanwhile, the swallow had turned into this gorgeous nurse, Isis, and the nurse gave an explanation of the situation, and she said, by the way, it's my husband that's in that pillar there, and I'd be grateful if you could just let me take it home. So the king came in and he said, certainly. So he removes the pillar, gives it to Isis, and is put on a barge. So on the way back to the Nile, she removes the lid, the cover of the sarcophagus, and lies on top of her dead spouse and conceives of her dead spouse. This is an image that occurs in Egyptian art all the time. Out of death comes life and all of this kind of business. And when they land, she, in the papyrus swamp, gives birth to her child, Horus, with the dead Osiris beside her. This is the motif for the Madonna, actually. It becomes the Madonna. In Egyptian symbology, Isis represents the throne. The pharaoh sits on the throne of Isis as the child sits on the mother lap. And when you look in the Cathedral of Chartres in the West Portal, you will see the Madonna as the throne with the little child Jesus as the world emperor on her lap. That is the same image that's come over.
And you say the Christian fathers took this image?
Definitely, and they really say so. You read the second letter of Peter, and he says, those forms which were merely mythological forms in the past are now incarnate and actual in our Savior. There was a mythology of the Savior, the dead and resurrected.
Okay, so that's, can everyone hear me? Yeah, okay, so that's the next segment. It's the, you can see as Isis playing so many roles in transformations in life. Now, this is acted out at the level of dynastic succession, but it's taken as people have understood it as a metaphor more for all transformations. People who are trying to understand its relevance today. So this is an example of the role that of how transformation, graceful transformation, positive, productive, natural transformation is characterized as feminine. So, and as a positive thing, and she kind of ushers in the transform. She brings it about. She ushers it in and brings it about in a in a very graceful way. And that, to me, I think really epitomizes one aspect that we these days call feminine. Does anybody else have comments on this? It's a huge, this has really been an enduring story. As pointed out Campbell, even in New Testament times, up to 400 AD, there was a temple to Isis in Ephesus. So she has had a real impact for centuries.
If anyone has any questions or comments, you can type exclamation point in the chat or raise your hand in Zoom. One of the things I did learn from this video is the full story of Isis. Like I don't know why I missed it, but I never knew of the part where she, I had heard that, of Osiris being in the trunk of a tree and that tree giving life. I had heard of the myth of, people cutting that tree down and making different things. I had never heard of the story of Osiris being in the palace and trying to make the baby immortal. I don't know why I never heard that, but so that was interesting. One, and I think too, Peter saying in Second Peter that Isis is basically the story of Isis and Horus. It's basically Jesus and Mary, right? Never heard that one. So it was very, very interesting and very enlightening. I think one thing you see, and you see it well, is eventually, I'm not actually surprised that there were Greek influences in Christianity, because that's where it was. That's where Jesus was, and so it doesn't surprise me at all, actually. But I think what surprises me is, and not even the imagery, because we studied that before, right? There's the imagery that matches Isis and Mary. We've talked about that before. Um, I think Peter acknowledging it is what shocks me a little bit. And I think it shocks me because in the Gospel of Mary, which is a Gnostic gospel, uh, it is talked about that Peter was jealous of Mary's relationship with Jesus. So it surprises me that he talks about Isis in such a way that he compares it to Jesus and that being fulfilled. So um, those are just some of my thoughts. But if anyone else has anything, please type exclamation point in the chat or raise your hand in Zoom.
Well, I did read the second letter of Peter. I couldn't find in there what Joseph Campbell was talking about. He'd have to show me what he's referring to. You know, he's a credible source, so I accept that is his opinion and he has a basis for it. But I don't think there is no reference to ISIS in that letter. There might be a general reference to other mythologies, you know, human desires that were manifest in the life of Jesus. He'd have to show me where it is because I could not find it. But I don't think that takes away from the fact that there is a lot of iconography that is carried over. You said it was Isis is Greek, and she might as well be Greek. But she's Egyptian, and you know, the Ephesus is in Turkey. It wasn't at Turkey back then. I don't know. Ephesus might have been its own city-state. It was a very cosmopolitan region of the world where all of these cultures were interacting. And so, yeah, it doesn't surprise me either that the early Christians would adopt some of these other images, evocative images that were current in their culture. It would just kind of make sense to do that.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I was like, I don't ever remember reading that in Peter, and I'm like, I could have missed it, but thank you for clarifying that. Up next, I have Joe.
Yeah, one of the interesting things that is actually worth bringing up is Joseph Campbell talks a lot about, obviously, the hero's journey, quite a bit. But if you think about it in these terms, and this kind of, I guess, relates back to what we were talking about with the Virgin Mary and some of the reasons as to why the virgin birth is even necessary, is that the hero doesn't exist without the divine feminine. It all begins, the hero doesn't exist without the divine feminine. It starts with a divine feminine. And that's interesting. I mean, there's the clear roles that how the feminine plays, the divine feminine, it plays a role in helping as far as, as understanding wisdom and things along those lines. But everything begins with the divine feminine. And if you think about it, that's the importance of the Virgin Mary, is because of that, so that you're having the Son of God come through, but this is just, as far as ISIS or anything, everything emanates from the divine feminine. If you look at it from that perspective, again, there's no hero's journey without the divine feminine.
Yeah, I
Just
think that's a good point. I hadn't really thought about that, but yeah. I don't want to say that she's in the background. She's really quite a player in this, but the heroes in that story, of course, were Osiris and Horus, and she's the one who made it happen. She made it possible.
Right. Right. So everything that happens from that point on is essentially a result of the divine feminine.
Yeah.
I think, yeah. If anybody else has any questions or comments, you can type exclamation point in the chat or raise your hand in Zoom.
The one thing I will make a point, I think about whenever I go through this story and stories like it with birth and rebirth, and this is one of transformation involving rebirth. I think some of these stories about birth and rebirth fail to identify an opportunity that's available to us as humans, and that is that we don't die before our progeny are reborn. And in this story, we've got Osiris dying before Horus is reborn. And that takes away the opportunity of Osiris having influence, if you will, in modern lingo, sharing his, not just his genes, but his memes with Horus. And that's retrieved in this myth with Horus going back and capturing the eye of Osiris and using it to see back into the future, or back into the past for the benefit of the future. That's another part of this story. But it recaptures the idea. That's what the meme is. The meme is just all the practical knowledge that's brought, that is transmitted from one generation to the next. And it's that's lost in this story, and it's retrieved by going back and capturing Osiris's eyeball. And I don't know if Horus implants it in his head or not. I don't know. I don't remember. But and that same lost opportunity is in these myths, in the myth where humans are equated with grain and they're cut down in order to give rebirth. The grain dies before the progeny is reborn. So only the genes are passed on, not the practical knowledge. Trees are different from that. I don't know why we don't hear a lot of tree myths about like rebirth from trees, but the trees drop their fruit. They do not die before the progeny are reborn. But most of the grain mythology, I think, misses out on that opportunity, that as humans, and more or less as animals, we miss the opportunity, or we have the opportunity to have an impact on the progeny, not just through our genes, but through education. And it's not just our direct progeny, it's through the younger people. And that's obviously going on all the time everywhere. And they take what the patrimony of the past and run with it. Young people today could not do what they're doing if they weren't building on the shoulders of their predecessors. And that was true for all of us, I think. So I just don't think, I think that's an opportunity as humans that should not be lost. Once I was at a philosophy meetup in Phoenix, where I live, and there was a woman who showed up from, who had studied evolutionary biology. And she was insisting in the meeting, and people had trouble accepting it, that human beings have they serve no purpose once they've given birth to their offspring. And I couldn't for years, or at least certainly for months, probably for years, I couldn't put my finger on why that was wrong. But then when I realized the practical knowledge and the education is something that we did not think to raise in that meeting with her and get her reaction to that. But I think that's probably undeniable that that our young people definitely learn a lot from us as elders. Is anybody, that's just me ranting, I guess, or riffing. There is, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You can go. I was just going to ask if anybody else had any questions or comments.
Had a question. I'm sorry, I didn't put an exclamation mark.
Yeah.
So firstly, I just want to ask, Evanik, so are we at the end of the meetup? Where are we?
I think, Brian, is this the last video, right? That we
Well, we
showed
got
tonight?
one more section, the integration of male and masculine and feminine, but we've really run well over. So I don't know if people want to do that or not. It runs 10 minutes.
So we're close to the end, Shrikant. And
Okay. I just wanted to, both talk to you, Penny and Brian, about this series, about your experience of the series. I don't know if you want to do it before the video, instead of the video. So that you decide, Evanik.
I'll let Brian decide since he prepared it tonight. How do you want to do it, Brian?
Well, I'm hoping others will be interested in the video, so let's do it before the video.
Okay. All right. So, Brian, what was it like doing this series on the divine feminine? What did you get from it? Because the thing is, I mean, folks, I want to tell you that really the people who do the presentation get the most out, because they spend a lot of time preparing for it. They get a lot of feedback. So I just want to hear from their side what they got. Brian, what did you get?
Well, I think it's exactly that I've always gotten a lot from the 52 Living Idea meetups on topics, even the ones I did not host. And in doing this one, I was hoping to get as much from the goddess worship studies as I had from the others. But yes, it turns out that hosting, participating, preparing, I got a lot more out of it. I really had to dig into it, select topics. Once the topics were selected, give form to the substance, try to put it in a format that would encourage participation. I really got a lot out of that. Plus, I got a lot out of, the contributions of the other participants. Even, I don't know quite, how people feel about their background in these areas. They don't have to have read the book. They might be watching the video for the first time. But even at that, I think it's wonderful when they share what they feel, share what they think, without being really confident about knowing a lot about the context or background. I really, really appreciate all of that. And that's probably the third element that I benefited from a lot, that I really hadn't expected as much as I did. I really like it when other people share their thoughts and feelings.
Thank you, Brian. Penny, what about you?
Oh, well, I think I got a lot out of this series. And as a woman, it gave me a lot deeper understanding of the society that we live in, and why my upbringing had in many ways been the way it was, where women were definitely considered a little secondary, not as bad as before the women had the vote, but anyway, where it had originated in human development, basically, kind of the role that the woman had taken in Western society, and that this really hadn't always been the case throughout human history. And there had been a time when both male and females were considered much more equal. And so to me, it was very, very interesting on a personal level, this study, and just a lot of things that I had not been aware of, and which was one of the topics I think of, like Isabella Price and stuff, that they're trying to raise the awareness of, the background of humanity and a way to move forward to incorporate, the fact that basically the feminine masculine is in everybody. And if we accept, put the attitudes on a equal basis, I mean, the different energies or aspects, then mankind can really move forward and solve a lot of the problems that are facing us. So, but I think as a person who was preparing and looking at the books and stuff too, yeah, you do get a lot out of it when you're preparing it. And as Brian had said too, I was very intrigued by what a lot of the personal experiences and things that other people knew about topics that were related, and that they could bring it in, because I knew a lot of it I didn't know anything about, and there were a lot of people who knew quite a bit already.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Penny. Evanique, what about you? What did you get?
Well, it helped me really understand all of the female goddesses. I think researching and reading the book, 2 times actually, was really enlightening, in seeing the presence of the divine feminine in all aspects and all walks of life. I think too, seeing how the different figures, feminine figures, were interconnected throughout books. I mean, so like you saw Oshun in the Virgin Mary in the Caribbean cultures, for instance, how these goddesses really, they originated in one place. We talked about that tonight with Isis, originated in Egypt, but was spread across. So it went to Greece, and it went in some cases to, into Christianity, and, it crossed the globe. So I think these principles are universal. I think the universal aspect of all of it is what is key, the uniting factors. The feminine giving life, the feminine nurturing, the feminine growing. And it didn't have to be through physical motherhood. It could be through agriculture. It could be through so many different things, and how these feminine figures were interwoven in culture and society. It wasn't just worship. It was like a part of everyday life. As far as the experience overall, this has been a wonderful experience, to be able to learn with everybody else about the divine feminine. Also working with Brian and Penny has been a great experience, because I mean, Brian's presentations have been brilliant, and the simple fact of how deep he goes really adds to the series. And working with Rupali too. I know she's not here tonight, but like getting to work with different people from different areas in 52 Living Ideas has been an amazing journey, and I've made so many new friends doing this. So this has been like a great experience for me overall.
Wonderful. Thank you. And this is just, I'm just so grateful to the three of you for putting it together, because it's just so much. It's kind of like, ultimately, this is a community, and the more you put in, the more you get. That's the rule. And it's really amazing. Like each of these connections is important. Like you working together in the group, kind of planning things. I think that is very valuable. You see how different people think about these things. And firstly, I'm delighted that you chose this topic and this entire series. So thank you so much. All right, Brian, on to the video.
Well, I don't think we can leave without thanking you for making this all possible. What we've done is quite clearly very derivative and subsidiary to what you have done in terms of putting together this really incredible format, and then being so generous to make it available to us to we all, I think, were moved to do the goddess, and you made it possible for us to do that. So we thank you.
You're
Yep,
welcome.
I agree. Thank you, Shrikant. And
Thank
thank you for this platform.
Thank you.
Shall we move on then to the video?
Absolutely.
All right, let's see. Share screen. This is the last 10 minutes where he talks about the integration of the feminine and masculine, and other topics that we've touched on already this evening. These are his last observations about the goddess in the context. So it's he's trying to be a little more sweeping in some of his conclusions. Oh, here we go. Oops, let me make sure I've got. Let's start again.
With God. And it's associated with the moon, which dies and is resurrected every month. And you have
Here is he shifted topic here from the Madonna to the Savior image, which is related to Madonna because the Madonna gives birth to the Savior, the Isa story, the Christian story, the birth of Buddha from a mother. There are many examples.
3 nights dark, and you have Christ 3 nights in the tomb and 3 days in the tomb, and all this kind of thing. It's an intentional saying that which was merely talked about is now fact. And no one knows what the date of Christmas ought to be, but it's put on the date of the summer, of the winter solstice, when the nights begin to be shorter and the days longer, the birth of light. And so there is an idea of death to the past and birth to the future in our lives and in our thinking all the time. Death to the animal nature, birth to the spiritual. And these symbols are talking about it one way or another.
So when the council,
the goddess is the one who brings it about. The second birth is through the second mother. Notre Dame de Paris, Notre Dame de Chartres, our mother church. We are reborn by entering and leaving a church.
and it doesn't mean physically, it means
spiritually.
That there's a power that's unique to the feminine principle.
It can be put that way. It's not necessarily unique to her. You can have rebirth through the male also, but using this system of symbols, right. The woman becomes the regenerator.
There's that wonderful saying in the New Testament of Jesus. In Jesus, there is no male or female. In the ultimate sense of things, there is neither.
It would have to be. I mean, if Jesus represents the source of our being, we are all, as it were, thoughts in the mind of Jesus. He is the word that has become flesh in us too.
You and I would possess characteristics that are both male and female.
Well, actually, the body does. But sometime in the fetal period, it becomes apparent that this is going to be male and this is going to be female. Meanwhile, it's a kind of neutral body with the potentialities for either inflection.
So all through life, we are honoring or suppressing one or the other.
And in that yin yang figure from China, you know, in the dark fish or whatever you want to call it, there's a light spot. And in the light one, there's a dark spot. That's how they can relate. You couldn't relate at all to something that of which you did not participate, into which you did not participate at all. That's why the idea of God as the absolute other is a ridiculous idea. There could be no relationship to that which is absolute other.
But the question arises in discussing the male-female principle, the virgin birth, the spiritual power that gives us the second birth. The wise people of all time have said that we can live the good life if we learn, in fact, to live spiritually. But how does one learn to live spiritually when one is of the flesh? Remember, Paul said the desires of the flesh are against the spirit and the desires of the spirit are against the flesh. How do we learn to live spiritually?
Well, that was in ancient times and in primitive times, the business of the teacher. He was to give you the clues to a spiritual life. That was what the priest was for. Also, that was what the ritual was for. A ritual can be defined as an enactment of a myth. By participating in a good, sound ritual, you are actually experiencing a mythological life. And it's out of that one can learn to live spiritually.
These stories of mythology actually point the way to the spiritual life.
Yes, you've got to have a clue. You've got to have a roadmap of some kind, and these are all around us. They're here.
And the roadmap to which the goddess stories are pointing is the map of elevating the spiritual to an equality with the physical so that you live in union with those two.
Yes, there you come to the real sanctity of the earth itself, because that is the body of the goddess. When Yahweh creates, he creates of the earth and breathes his life into it. He's not there. She's there. Your body is her body. And there's that kind of identity.
Well, that's why I'm not so sure that the future of the race and the salvation of the journey is in space. I think it is well right here on earth, in the body, in the womb of all of our being.
Well, it certainly is. I mean, when you go out into space, what you're carrying is your body. And if that hasn't been transformed, space won't transform it for you. But thinking about space may help you to realize something.
You certainly thought about space in this wonderful passage. You're describing a page out of the National Geographic Atlas of the World, but you read this and something happened to you.
What these pages opened to me was the vision of a universe of unimaginable magnitude and inconceivable violence. Billions upon billions, literally, of roaring thermonuclear furnaces scattering from each other, each thermonuclear furnace being a star, and our sun among them. Many of them actually blowing themselves to pieces, littering the outermost reaches of space with dust and gas, out of which new stars with circling planets are being born right now. And then from still more remote distances beyond all these, there come murmurs, microwaves, which are echoes of the greatest cataclysmic explosion of all, namely the Big Bang of creation, which according to recent reckonings must have occurred some 18 billion years ago. That's where we are, kiddo. And to realize that, you realize how really important you are, you know, one little micro bit in this great magnitude. And then out of that must come the experience that you and that are in some sense one, and you partake of all of that.
And it begins here.
It begins here.
Okay, that was those were his final comments. He touched on the integration of the male and female to begin with, and then talked about other topics like the role of the teacher, and then pulled it all together with this last image of space. The the one thing that struck me out, I might go just say first, in a very offhanded way, he started out this whole segment by talking about how everything came from nothing, from chaos, and chaos was neither male nor female, neither masculine nor feminine. The first thing that arose was Gaia, which was the physical. I don't pretend to be able to characterize that, but certainly a female power, a female being, a female force as the first formation. And then we had the male and female arising from that. So the key thing was, in the beginning was nothing, and it was neither male nor female. And now we get back to this, that ultimately there is no male or female, and that was embodied and epitomized by Jesus. And I also like the fact that he referred to genders. You know, we've been talking about that already in this meeting, trying to get away from the use of genders to talk about these concepts. And he came up with the word inflections, that we are inflections of the male and female are inflections of that neutral being. So to me, that was a great takeaway. Does anybody else have reflections or comments?
JP.
Going to the Tao, the original Wu Ji is an empty state, not really even considered nothingness. It's just something that can't be understood. And Wu Ji becomes the Dai Ji, the split of yin yang, or male, female, Shiva Shakti. And beginning of the Judeo-Christian mythology or history or whatever you want to think, begins upon the word Elohim, not just El, God, but Elohim, at least two gods, which could be the male-female aspect together as a Wu Ji, the emptiness, the unknowingness that becomes two, because from the Wu Ji, Elohim, God and goddess mating, all things are created, heaven and earth, that being the male-female, the yin-yang, the Dai Chi. And when it says upon the wind flows upon the waters, the wind being the energy of the male spirit upon the female, which is the water, also translated as mare and Mary, just possibilities, because then two words that come to English is we have matrix based on matter for mother and pattern for father. Thus, as Joseph Campbell was discussing, the way the universe is set up, the matrix and the pattern together. Just thoughts. Thank you.
That was wonderful. I love that. And that's what I was saying earlier. We come to these with a specific context. It's, in this series, it's been more directly the Goddess book by Isabella Price. But wow, when people bring their context, I think that's so powerful. So thank you for that.
All right, up next I have Joe, followed by David and Penny.
Yeah, I mean, I very much appreciated the fact that he talked about the importance of understanding the kind of how the female and the male work together to understand ourselves, understand the whole, and understand our own psyche. And so, and how these myths serve as a map to bring into consciousness some of the qualities of the feminine and the masculine. And also their destructive natures as well, that these myths also depict. So it's helps us, and that's helps us understand ourselves. And I mean, it's not to be ignored either. I think that there are a lot of understanding the human psyche comes from these stories. And that's why I think it's really important to understand the contextual nature of these stories and what was exactly trying to be communicated. Coming back to what we've taken from the series is that, you start to see that each culture has its own appreciation and its own way of expressing its appreciation for the feminine. And there's something very important about that, and kind of looking at what each culture brings actually will help us better understand, kind of different perspectives on reality, on a meta level as well as the physical level. On the individual level, we could talk about it from a psychological standpoint. The understanding the masculine and the feminine in ourselves, and then also from on a meta level, there is a understanding of what cultures were thinking and how they were actually approaching, why they approached the explanations the way they did. But nonetheless, there's an appreciation for the feminine that you see across all cultures, and they both they express them in different ways, but there is that aspect where there's there's an attempt to understand and what role each of us has, and that I like how Joseph Campbell put it, to say that one could be superior to the other is not necessarily accurate. It's in conjunction with one another. So anyway.
Yeah, I think that, as you said, that we've looked a little bit at different contexts, and this understanding of masculine, feminine is certainly something that plays out universally. But yeah, to understand the cultures, to get a handle on the cultures, a good one place to start is certainly the understanding of the masculine, feminine, and how they interact. In going through the book, I thought, well, the different ways to think about it, but there are obvious differences in the body, and male and female are just would be easy ways for primitive people. So I can't put myself back into that mindset. I'm not sure I ever could, but I haven't spent much time on it. But a way that they might have used to understand many things is the way that males and females interact and give rise to new things and different things, and how they work together to accomplish common goals. Sometimes it's female with female, sometimes male with male, and sometimes male with female. It seems to me it would be natural to try to understand the world using that microcosm. So I'm not surprised that these categories have endured even to the present day.
It just really quickly, it also goes to it shows you too, when you categorize things too much as well. Like, in other words, when it's out of balance, in the sense that you're putting the feminine in one category and the male in another, as opposed to seeing how they're complementary. And when you keep kind of, you can almost subjugate one to the other. And when things are out of balance, then things get, they become destructive. So there's something very, very deep there. And if you think back to that's where Taoism is so powerful, I find. When, the idea of naming things too much, kind of categorizing them, going too far. So, so I think that's one of the beauties of actually Taoism, is understanding. And we've talked about this before, how the West is very good at naming things sometimes, which enables certain things to be done. But that's not necessarily optimal for a lot of different reasons. A lot of different, that can go very deep. We can go very deep into that, and into how that leads into, a very modern interpretation of the world.
That's it for me. That's a great reminder. I have that Western inclination. See things black, white, to categorize and classify a lot.
I think we all do.
Okay, up next, I have David, followed by Penny and Katie.
Well, to continue on from the points that Joseph was making, the sobering thought is that somebody wrote these myths. Initially, they were written by a person. And of course, since that time, they've been adapted and changed by the various societies and their particular cultures. So really, that involves psychology, sociology, and history. So it's yes, that's the sobering thought that these myths have a human origin. Anyway, that's enough from me.
I would never say that, David. Anyone else?
We have Penny, followed by Katie.
Yeah, I just was going to say, well, two things. First, I think that one of the reasons it's very difficult for us to separate, female and male and the characteristics, et cetera, is because I think that the patriarchal society clearly drew that distinction. And so it's become just part of our culture. So it's very hard to talk about it in a unified method, kind of like everybody's part of it, because the patriarchal society didn't want to have anything to do with the female feminine characteristics, they were lesser. And so it's hard to reintegrate that. And this is kind of to make a comment just on the last part he made about the universe and, how our part in the universe and how insignificant we are. We were, about a week ago, I was visiting my granddaughters in New York, and the little 6-year-old is doing like a little space camp after school. And she said to me, "Do you know we're all made of space dust?" I thought, wow, what a thought. But, I think probably it's true. We are all made of space dust.
Yeah.
And that a 6-year-old knows this and I didn't know it, you know?
Thank you, Penny. That is cute though. We are made of space dust. I love that. Up next, I have Katie, followed by Joe.
Well, my takeaway from tonight is by exploring the feminine, where the feminine is a totality, whereas Christianity is more the masculine. The totality is maybe the focus on the 10 Commandments. Maybe it kind of softens it a little bit for me, the focus on rules. Even though I think most people would agree with the 10 Commandments, unless there's kind of an exceptional situation. But it just softens, it softens the kind of like a, male rule making focus.
Thank you, Katie. Up next, I have Joe.
I was just thinking in terms of, it would be interesting just to see the relationship between the role of the divine feminine in more technologically advanced societies. Now, I think there's some point they become, specifically industrialized societies, how something, I think that the divine feminine gets lost in that. I'm really just thinking out loud right now. But that's there. I think that there is something to that. Anyway.
It's
Brian,
funny.
oh, go ahead, Brian.
It's funny you say that because we were just meeting with some friends, and I said I wish I could go to Ephesus in Turkey and visit that place. That's the one place. Since the pandemic, I haven't been so keen to travel, but that's the one place I would really like to see because I hear it's really spectacular. And so she said, "Yeah, I've been there," and she described it. And you mentioned high culture. She said that place, and she took a guided tour and all that. She said that place seemed to have a higher culture than we do. And that's one that definitely valued the feminine.
Thank you, Brian. One thing I was just thinking when you said that about industrial countries, I guess like the United States, I wonder if it has to do with capitalism too. I'm like you, Joe, I'm just thinking out loud, but the thing I was thinking of is, capitalism is businesses are beholden to shareholders, and the purpose of business is profit. And I wonder if that's more of a practical male thing, not making a judgment either way about capitalism. I'm kind of neutral on topic, but I just wonder if that's part of the reason. Joe, you can go right ahead.
I think it goes deeper than any system, to be quite honest. I think it's materialism on steroids, and a lack of wisdom, and a lack of balance. And so industrialization puts everything into a category. I think it's a very deep problem. I think it goes beyond any kind of economic system per se.
Good point.
Two things that I put together in my own mind this evening was this idea of, to tie it with the economics, it's the that these first just as Joseph Campbell, well, it was Joseph Campbell's statement that triggered this thought, that the raiding, the herding societies that were rather warlike raided the agricultural valleys and really plundered them. But they were raiders, and they took what they wanted and then let things regenerate on their own. sometimes they wouldn't regenerate and they'd have to go raiding again somewhere else because they weren't able to cultivate their own things, or they just didn't do it. And I think that's, I wouldn't put this on capitalism, but I think that we do have kind of a raiding mentality as regards the natural resources. And now we have huge technologies that have enabled us to have materialism on steroids. And so we can raid the earth and plunder it and turn it into, cars and tables and lamps and things. And there hasn't been much concern for whether or not it regenerates itself, but we're so powerful now because of the technological prowess we've developed one way or another, that we need to pay attention to these things now. These are not inexhaustible resources. They're not infinitely renewable. Some don't renew themselves at all. That's my thought that struck me this evening when he started talking about the raiding herder mentality. We've turned that mentality onto Mother Earth herself.
Thank you, Brian. Does anybody else have any final thoughts before we conclude this evening? If not, I just want to thank everybody again for coming and spending your Friday night with us. It's always an honor to have you guys here with us and to learn about the Divine Feminine with us. I hope you guys got something so great out of the series. I know Brian, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we decided that we're taking a break.
I'm
From
taking.
Divine. Well, I think we all are taking a couple of months break from Divine Feminine for the summer. And then we have to discuss whether we're going to do Joseph Campbell is next. I know you have mentioned it in the email.
Yeah,
but we
let's
can
ask
talk
if
about.
anybody's here. How many are still here? We can ask if people are interested in that.
Okay. So really quick for the people that are still here, we still have a good number. How many people would be interested in this series on Joseph Campbell? Joe.
Yes, absolutely. I
Okay.
think it's actually a very, very important series.
All right, and Connie's a yes. Katie, I see. Yeah, so I think we're getting majority yeses, Brian. Yeah, I think it's a yes.
He is a crowd pleaser.
JP, are you just saying yes or?
Yes, and would you include other mythologists such as Mircea Eliade?
I would be, yeah, I'm glad to do any and everything. The one thing that I found in prepping these presentations is I need to have some discipline to keep it, or some discipline as regards the content, or else I don't get them done at all. So yeah, he's a really important mythologist. And we could bring him in tangentially, but I would like to use these Campbell. What I plan to do is the Campbell videos, in particular the series with Bill Moyers as the thread. And again, I really appreciate it when people bring their own context to bear and share it with the group. I wouldn't say the context we've chosen is arbitrary, but it's just one of the many different ways, one of the many different contexts, one of the many different on-ramps for discussing the issues raised by Joseph Campbell. And I would be very eager to have other people bring perspectives and contexts to light, the ones that they're aware of. I think that would just that could add as much as the Joseph Campbell videos. But if I'm doing it, I'll use that as the thread. And I personally don't have the background on I know the mythologist you're mentioning, but I do not have a personal background in his work. I do not know his work. So
All
if
right.
somebody else had it and folded it in, that would be wonderful.
It looks like we're doing Joseph Campbell then, Brian. Sharika, I saw you.
Yes. Yes, I just want to share with you the experience of using videos in 52 Living Ideas, because we have done that many, many times, and it works actually very beautifully. And Brian, one of the other advantages of using videos, especially if you announce in advance that this is the video that we are going to work on, that's one thing. And especially if it's a topic which is of great interest to the people in 52 Living Ideas in general, which is what these, power of myth videos are going to be. If that is all the case, what the amazing thing that happens is that people actually watch the video and they will come prepared to give you observations. When we did stuff on Jordan Peterson videos, that's exactly what happened. So the beautiful thing about that is that it reduces the pressure on how much you need to prepare. So you can actually scale down your preparation and, allow people to say, speak for 3 to 5 minutes on anything that you got from the video. So it's a format which allows kind of this mix and match between presentation and the attendee generated content. This is what we did with the series on Jordan Peterson, if you remember. So Roger, Victor, Claire would have some presentations. Sometimes they would have long presentations. Sometimes they would have short presentations. There would be time where there would be no presentations. And it worked in each of those cases. So it's a beauty, and it works only if the videos are of great interest, great general interest to a large fraction of the 52 Living Ideas community, which I know Power of Myth are, because there is such deep interest in Carl Jung, such deep interest in mythology, and such deep interest in Joseph Campbell. So those are just my thoughts about kind of possible formats. So it's like it reduces the pressure on you, Brian.
That's a great idea. We could definitely, I feel like I could improve along those lines. That's a great suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sharika. That's a very good point. Yeah, definitely we'll get those posted when we do the series, not like right away, obviously, but
yeah. So just one addition, and you're going to find some surprises like we did in Jordan Peterson. Initially, I just started with, I think, Claire and Roger, and then Victor started showing up, and he had more and more things to say. So I said, hey, Victor, would you like to be a presenter? You would find that, you'll have kind of co-conspirators join the entire crew as you go along, which is really rewarding as well.
Yes, we were lucky to have Rupali join in at least one of our presentations, and that was great.
yeah. Yeah, that was with the Indian goddesses. She was really great.
He was
Like
really good.
yeah. And that was fun. And I was able to it was one of those things where working with her, not only did I learn more about the goddesses, but also she did help, like I did the base and then she like added the meat to the bone. So it was a really great collaboration, and I look forward to doing more of those.
Yeah, that I remember now how that rolled. That was very, very good, very effective.
Yeah. So with that, I think we can conclude because we're an hour over time. Thank you so much, Brian, for all the work that you did. You and Penny for all the work that you did. I look forward to working with you both in the future, along with others. So thank you so much for this series. I'm kind of sad to see it end, in a sense. And I don't think it's going to be a complete end. I'm sure we'll do like interim goddesses or something. I can't see this completely ending, but this ends the Isabella Price book. How about we leave it there?
Okay, let's do that.
Yeah. Oh, sure, Con.
Yeah, I just want to tell people about the meetups coming up. Is that okay?
It's your meetup.
Okay, okay. All right. No, you're the moderator, so it's always the moderator's decision. So, so we've got a really interesting meetup coming up on Sunday. It's titled "The Girl from Spaceship Earth," and this is an author called Pat Ravasio who has written the book, and it is about Buckminster Fuller's core ideas. And what she's going to be talking about is what she learned about the life principles of Buckminster Fuller. So that's what is coming up. And as you know, on Mondays, we do poetry. On Tuesdays, we do art of war. On Wednesdays, coming Wednesday, we're going back to Bucky. And there is a really fascinating, one of my favorite topics on Bucky. It says integrity is what we're going to be talking about. You know, what does integrity mean and what is its role in human life? On Thursday, it's going to be Gospel of John. We're doing chapter 13, the high priestly prayer. And on Friday, I think we're doing, let's see, I'm a little bit confused. We're doing Designing Your Life, right? On Friday, coming Friday?
Yes.
Yes, and we don't have anything set up yet, right?
We're working on that.
Okay, sounds good. But that Designing Your Life is a great series, so don't miss that. And then
Joe, I think Joe wants to say something.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm fine. No, I'm
Oh,
fine.
I just saw you
Yeah.
unmute.
All right, Joe, go ahead.
No, I was going to say we have a kind of a plan that we're going to looking at doing some things without waiting the devil and bringing back some of that and seeing how it actually, as far as practicality is concerned, how do we integrate that into our lives?
Wonderful. And it's one of the more popular series that we have, so don't miss that. All right, folks. Okay, over to you, Evanik.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and have a great weekend. And I will see you next time.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.